I'm not totally sure where to start with Neva. The problem, if you can call it that, is that the game is sort of perfect for me. Not insofar as to say that it has no flaws or mechanical issues, but that... Have you ever played a game, and for no clear, easily discernible reason, you just connect with that game? It's more so than just liking the game or thinking the game is really good, but in a way that feels like the game is meant for you. That every component of the experience just slots into place perfectly for you. It's a rare experience, but I'm struggling because that's how Neva worked for me. And so I want to tell you about the story, but I also want to tell you about the mechanics, and the art style, and the character design, and the audio design, and the soundtrack, and you have no idea how much of a struggle it is to just say the words we have to start at the start, because I want to start with everything. But we have to start at the start. Neva is a short game, and the story elements are a screen time minority while being a value majority, meaning that there's a lot to talk about in regards to these cutscenes and story beats, even though they're few and far between. So, even though this isn't going to be a video specifically for looking at openings to games, I have a lot to say about the opening for this game specifically. Neva opens, I think, with one of the more beautiful shots I've seen in a game. And it's not just the emotional weight of the scene, it's the way this entire game is designed, this sort of not quite watercolor style. The way everything is given just enough form to identify what it is, and good God, the use of color. Do you have any idea how hard it is to make something look so effortless? You are not looking at pretty art, you are looking at the mastery of a technique. And honestly, why am I even talking? The soundtrack is happening right now. Do you see what I mean? How am I supposed to just start at the start? I don't know anything about anything, and I could write a billion words on how perfect these opening seconds are. The music builds and swells, the colors shine out so vibrant as if to dare tempt the thought, what could ever go wrong? We follow along a bird, and it reaches for the sun and tucks into a dive. Only suddenly, we realize it's not a dive. This bird is dead. There is a sickness in this land. And it's only in response to this sickness that our own characters emerge. Do you get the significance of this? That our primary antagonist is introduced before our own character? Before we even understand who we are, we're shown what this world is and what threatens it. Which means next, we have to see how our characters relate to it. The threat to this world is not yet so present, but that does not mean it is not here. It approaches rapidly, with little warning, and then it's upon us. And for a few brief, fragile moments, the threat appears to be manageable. And even when it becomes overwhelming for us, our companion is strong. Not strong enough. Not alone. These characters have barely even been on screen. There hasn't even been a bit of dialogue, but the design and the audio and the music involved in this opening scene brings so much power to the scene that this grief is shared perfectly between the character and myself. Neva is a game about sorrow, about tragedy, and grief. But those things are not ours alone to bear. It's barely been 4 minutes. No words are spoken, no names are named, but everything that matters to this story has been laid out clear, and I don't know if I've ever been more invested in a story. There's so many things to say about this opening alone. How the death of this bird is noted with a single hit of bass, and the same hit is used again when the camera cuts to the wolf. How our first exposure to the sickness of the world is almost romanticized, but these beautiful dark flowers only to be told in no uncertain way that actually This sorrow is ugly. The way it surges and clings and pulls down the things it consumes. How the world as it should be is what's introduced to us first, before ourselves, before even the sickness, highlighting how this is not just a threat to us, but the entirety of the world around us. How the song that plays while grief overtakes is called Where Courage Abide, because not since Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore wrote Deference for Darkness, not since Danger created 0442 Still Free and 1902 Kusamakura and the entire rest of the Haven soundtrack, has there been a musical score so perfect, so definitive for the game and the world it exists in. Berlinist is simply too powerful. Am I properly selling how powerful these opening 4 minutes are? What a big goddamn deal it is for this setup to this game to be this perfect? Do you understand that I will not be able to sleep or eat or drink or think of anything else until I am sure that you get this? Get me off your second monitor. Neva is primary monitor content. Sorry. This one means a lot to me. I mean, quite frankly, everything I make a video on means a lot to me. That's why I make videos on them, but this just isn't the same. You can put me back, I'm okay now. After our introduction, we're greeted with our first chapter card, marking this arc of the story as summer. The sickness is getting worse. The season of summer shows us that while the glade we call home is not exactly condemned, while there is still beauty and life and sorrow is not so omnipresent, there are fewer and fewer places by the day that are not weighed down by it, and the further we travel from our home, the worse and worse we see the world become. The main story of the game is never totally established in-game. That's not an accident. Neva is one of those games that fits really cleanly in the esoteric, abstract, only 2 words ever spoken sort of narrative structure, while still being an incredibly deep narrative experience. That's not an easy thing to pull off. It risks the core idea of your story being lost because it means that the core thesis of your game is left largely to player interpretation. That said, I don't think I've ever seen a game nail it like Neva has. The world is dying, and we'd really rather prefer if it didn't. Who our character is for this adventure isn't really stated or of note. What matters is that our character, unnamed in the game, but named in the game's details on the Steam page as Alba, is the companion to a special kind of wolf called a... They never gave Neva's species a name? You gave the player character a name, but left the titular character undefined? Interesting. Anyways, Neva belongs to a breed of a very special kind of wolf, and you might be like, no shit, it's special. It's the size of a bus and has antlers, but that's only 2 parts of what makes these wolves special, and there's 3, actually. The Song of the Wolf is capable of pushing back the sickness of the land and restoring health to nature, which is an act that we will not be shown with specific intent until Fall and beyond, but that I'm going to speak about now anyways because we've already been shown elements that matter revolving around it. The way Howling works is that it carries some sort of healing magic with it. It can revive the hurt, and while it cannot resurrect the dead, it can put it to rest. We see this with the final boss fight from Summer, and more clearly still with the first boss fight from Fall. I think it's also important to note that if you're playing on adventure mode, where Alba has health and can die, these moments where Neva howls to heal the world will also restore your health. Which is heartbreaking, because it means that when our unnamed wolf friend, the first wolf, howls at the end of the opening cinematic, it's not trying to fight anymore. It knows it can't win with force, so the wolf's final desperate act is to try to heal. Maybe that's why we wake up afterwards. And here, later, in Summer, when Alba and Neva get separated and you later find her alone and trapped by the sickness, whenever you call to her, she howls in response. It's the sound of her sadness, but also her attempts to push the sickness back, of which she is not strong enough to do alone.
Neva.
It is this howl that guides us through the seasons, to distant horizons, to stop, perhaps, to otherwise slow the spread of the sickness. Neva is one of those games that invites a great deal of speculative questioning and abstract thinking about its world and characters, and will answer for none of it. Who Alba is is basically irrelevant, so the game does not tell us. This is why Neva's species isn't given a name, why Neva's mother, the first wolf, is similarly unnamed. Alba is the only human we see in the game, and that means that I could only learn her name from the game's description on Steam because no one else is around to call her by anything. But even that calls up more questions, because we can see that Alba wears fine textiles, which would surely require some sort of loom, and agriculture for the fabric, whatever it be, and she wields a sword, insinuating that somewhere in this world is a group of people with advanced knowledge of metallurgy, and stop. It's not important. Pay attention to what you are being shown, otherwise you will miss the point. Maybe. Because when Neva wants to get your attention, it is very good at getting your attention. This means that while most of the world is pretty and beautiful and worthy of discussion in its own rights and merits, the element that I most want to talk about here is the Red Dream. Let me establish what that means. Towards the end of fall, there is a boss fight against a pair of elk that have succumbed to their infections. After the fight is won and the nature is restored, our duo take a moment to rest in the shade of the trees they have planted, so to say, only for Alba to suddenly awake alone and in the dark. Neva is nowhere to be found. She does not respond to our call, and when we try to leave to find her, Alba is grappled by the sickness and pulled into the earth. Already, we should know that something is weird here, and that compounds as we fall through the night sky. The sad, lone call of a distant wolf joined by new music, and the silhouettes of countless other wolves dangle in the air, lifeless. This was the point where I was beginning to wonder about the nature of this conflict. We'd already lost one wolf trying to restore nature. How many more would be required? How many bodies need be thrown into this fight? Could it ever even be enough? The Dream is an area where I began to understand the way the game was working. With the way that the game is structured, there's no way for Alba to vocally announce that she's feeling grief or sorrow over the loss of her companion from the intro to this story. I wonder if the game will have some sort of abstract visual to represent that, perhaps. And if you need any further evidence that this is, in fact, the first wolf, this is where we find Neva, alone, howling, and trying to heal what can't be fixed. There's even an arena fight where the only light we can see is blocked and obscured by the sickness of grief and sorrow literally feasting on the corpse of the first wolf. But grief and sorrow are not the only emotions that come with loss. There is also the rage. From this point onwards, the Dream is a descent, deeper and deeper, and we will see the design of the Dream begin to shift and change, moving from these stark whites and inky blacks into deep, angry, dull reds. That descent eventually brings us to here, which, by this stage of the game, architecture of this style indicates both a path to the left and a path to the right, both of which will contain an encounter that, once completed, will show a new path. Taking the path to the left will lead, in part, to this forest of pillars, and then onwards to a fight and back to the roadblock with one eye lit. Taking the path right will lead again to the forest of pillars where we... Neva is not a scary game. This scene scared me. And it took me a while to pinpoint exactly why it did, and to be truthful, I'm still not totally sure I can articulate it. This scene, seeing the first wolf here, angry, predatory, with malicious but patient intent towards me, it gives this sense of danger where you never would have thought there could be. It's the emotional reaction I think I would have if during a long weekend alone at the house I went into the basement to discover all of the lights off and a candle lit even though no one could have been down there but me, and I didn't light any candles. It's the reveal that you're not actually safe, that you never have been, and that something is deeply wrong. Obviously, this is going to be the final confrontation for the Red Dream, and before I say anything further, I think you just need to see what this is. I mean, go fuck yourself, Elden Ring. This introduction, this style of fight, the way the Phantom Wolf moves and attacks, it's so simple, but it's such a masterclass in design and storytelling via mechanics because it showcases the trauma that still lingers in our character. Alba literally fights the corporealization of her survivor's guilt, her regret, her sadness, which makes it such a big deal that this is the only boss fight you lose. Because when you need her most, Neva doesn't show. And then Alba wakes, and Neva is there, and the sun is bright, and the sickness is not so close. And what drives me crazy about this is that, yeah, the red dream was just a dream. It was, in fact, all in Alba's head, because this is the only way that the game can communicate that Alba is fucking heartbroken. Like, yeah, she's putting on a decent show and a brave face, but the first wolf died, and all Alba could do was watch. And the grief and the sorrow from that is festering and building inside her to the point where it is quite literally consuming her. No wonder the dream starts with an endless count of dead wolves. That's Alba's greatest fear on this adventure. Not just that these wolves will die, but that she'll let it happen. That this will just be a cycle of despair, and that when it matters, when it really, genuinely, actually matters, Neva will abandon her for that. There is one spoken word in the entire sequence, and it's better storytelling than anything else I've played this year. The final confrontation comes during winter, and if you'll permit me, I'd like to set the stage for her arrival. One of the smaller elements to Neva has been watching her grow larger as time passes. She starts out a small pup in summer, unable to defend herself, utterly reliant on Alba for protection. By fall, she has grown, is capable of newfound wolf magic, and is no longer such easy prey. And as winter rolls in, Neva has grown and matured into a genuine battle companion, capable of both incredible violence, miraculous healing, and providing rapid transport for Alba. It's the kind of thing that, as a Space Wolves player, I can really appreciate having in a dog friend. Winter does not bring anything particularly new to the table in terms of mechanics, but in presentation, this is where the game is going to showcase the full power of its design. The color scheming and art direction therein defines perfection. The level's use of reflection as Neva and Alba traverse the frozen waters gives the entire level this ethereal feeling, and the important locales exist in this dark fog atop the ice, which truly makes it feel like our adventure is taking us into the heart of the sickness at times. The design of Winter also adds new flavor to the mechanics we already know. How the use of reflection applies not just to Neva and Alba, but to the enemies in our path, and at times, our path itself. I had genuinely struggled to pinpoint the right words for how much I adore these elements. It feels like the rare moment where something in a game is exactly as clever as it wants to be. It feels like the designers of this game knew exactly what they wanted this to be, how they wanted it to feel, and also knew exactly how to do it, meaning that the union between concept and creation was flawless. I mean, if I really had to, I could squint and tilt my head and nitpick a few things here and there throughout the entire game, but as for these elements in Winter, I have no notes. Winter is also the season where we realize in the truest sense that we're not alone. I think, instinctually, I knew that. After all, the game opens with Neva as a pup, implying the first wolf as a mother, and it doesn't take an advanced study in animal biology to understand the implicit connection there, or the eventual narrative connection here. But to see another wolf in the wild for the first time was emotionally impactful in a way that I'm just not quite sure how to express. It's like a cure for loneliness I didn't know I had. So, of course, it can't just be a one-off encounter. The wild wolf will be encountered here, on the ice sheet, and here again when he comes to our rescue during a fight that turns against our favor, rescuing us and healing Neva before again fading into the fog of winter. We'll meet again under inversed conditions as Neva and Alba get the chance to save their savior. Neva's turn to howl, From this point on, the wild wolf is never too far from us, leading us higher and higher into the crumbling ruins and architecture of old, to a final confrontation. This entity, who I will refer to as the Woman in Black, is never given true characterization. I cannot tell you her name or the exact nature of her connection to the sickness. She seems to exist at the heart of it, but whether she has created it or merely lives in union with it, I cannot tell you. I do not think it matters either way. And as the Woman in Black, or this grotesque aberration that exists in her stead, gives chase, the game firmly reminds that to flee is an option, but not one you can do forever. And it reminds that we're not alone. To borrow a line, if this does not blow your mind, you have no emotion. The day is won. The sickness seems repelled. And as we wave goodbye to Neva, you might almost think the story is over. Funny how that works. The second arc of Winter is unique among the story of Neva because it is the only arc devoid of her. It opens on a field of pure white, snowfall surrounding. It comes to reveal an ascent, Alba climbing alone to the heights of a mountain. And if it seemed that our victory over the Woman in Black was final, this is the story's moment to tell us that it was not so. She persists, and this temple will be her home. This final arc of the game is unique in many ways, as it turns out. The minimalism present in the overall design and color scheme, the way the structure is built as though a temple to the Woman in Black, and the way certain areas are built to imply that the Woman in Black is not a singular concept, but rather one of many, as statues of her exist in a countless row that fades into the fog. The way that so many of the creatures that exist within the temple are so enraptured in worship to the Woman in Black, to the sickness of their sorrow, that they don't even move to assault us or defend themselves. And I'm not sure how to describe this final ascent. I mean, there's a lot to say. How the clean stone towers crumble away to reveal the humanoid forms of the infected, mashed and compressed together. How the climb leads to a pillar, defiant to physics, built entirely of those corpses. How you could read this a full journey. The red dream took us to the lowest parts of Alba's emotions, and now the final confrontation takes us to pure white heights, the highest point, the inversion, but none of that feels properly definitive. None of that feels complete. None of that makes me feel like I totally understand. But as I watched the Lady in Black, the personification of sorrow, of grief and trauma, consume and dispose of those that have fallen to the worship of the things that comprise her, I think I understand enough. And I'm ready for this to be over. This final fight does not feel difficult. It's simple in a way that gives me the impression that you're not supposed to need a second try, but rather, it exists as an interactive part of the narrative Neva has been telling. I think it serves to remind that truly overcoming this darkness has never been a one-person job, and the fear of Neva as abandonment has always been a foolish one. And then the part that matters happens. The Woman in Black grabs Neva and marks her across the eye, in the same way her mother had been at the start of the game, and a pit formed in my stomach as I thought to the dream and the countless dead wolves, and the thought crept into my brain. How many times have we been here? And then Neva howled, and the Woman in Black was taken by nature. And just like that, it was time to go home. It was time for spring. Spring opens with two beautiful reveals, the first being obvious. This shot alone is worth the price of admission, but the one I find even better is when I pressed the button to call for Neva, but Alba called for Bruma. For all the beauty of the world and of Bruma, I was, to be honest with you, scared. because I knew I'd been here before. And suddenly, that each level had been named for a season, only to bring us back here, back to where it began, back to the start of a cycle. How many times? A morning of exploration led to the same fields from the start of the game, and suddenly, I was watching the same cutscene from the opening moments of the game played, and it felt like the world fell out from underneath me. I realized that, for no particular reason, that I couldn't fucking do this. Okay, Nomada? I can't sit here at the end of your stupid game about a woman and her dog and be told that grief is cyclical. That sorrow is always just a season away, that there's always another woman in black in an infinite row, that all of the effort you could ever put towards brute forcing the good times is always going to be for nothing because the bad times never leave, and you're never strong enough, and the cycle will just never break. And then the bird died. The sickness on the horizon got closer and closer, and we met it, and nothing had changed. Beat for beat, it happened again. And what really fucking gets me here is that I watched Neva do all the things we say to do. I watched her rage against the dying of the light. I watched as she refused to go gentle into the night, and it didn't fucking matter. What mattered is that she wasn't alone. It's Bruma with the steel chair or whatever. And you know, if I was good at this, I'd have something poignant to say about the privilege and responsibility of youth being to break cycles, but honestly, it feels so shit that for all of the growth and effort Neva put in during her short life, for trusting us with every aspect of her being, for the weight of her sacrifice, she'll never even get to see the world she fought for. And then I saw the birds, and there was no note of bass. I saw a world that was free from sickness, and I realized that the cycle really, truly had been broken. And in that way, Neva was not, could never be, gone from this world. The world is her, and Bruma is how she survives in it. And that didn't fix it, you know? It didn't resurrect the dead, it didn't change it so that these terrible things hadn't happened, and it didn't make me not affected by them, but it affected me in its own way in turn. Sometimes it's just nice to be told that, yeah, bad things will happen. But there's life on the other side of those things, and it's worth fighting through to get there. You know, Neva got nominated for a handful of things at the Game Awards this year, which is impressive in its own right, since the game only released, not even 2 months before the event, so it didn't have a whole lot of time to make an impact. But it did. That's what it won, actually, the Games for Impact Award. And I think that's perfect, because I cried, more than normal while playing this game and making this video, because it was just... I played 60 or something different games this year, and when I think about how they've impacted me, it's Neva at the top of a shining hill, and who cares about the rest? I'm sorry I called your game stupid, Nomada. It's one of the best I've ever played. Okay, I'm okay. I've had some time away, and I'm okay now. This is one of the rare videos where the script itself was the element that took the longest to assemble. Neva was barely a 4-hour game, and it took me 7 or 8 working days to get the script to a place where I was happy with it because I wanted to talk about everything at once. I hope this year was good for you. It's been weird for me. We're barely here, you know? Around March or so, I was working on this project for Skyrim, but the channel was basically dead at that point, and I was really thinking about calling it quits after that one, but we're here. Thanks for helping me fund a Warhammer 40k addiction. I love these little guys, and also, paying rent. Extra special thank you to Daddy Biscuit 22, Jordan, Device MD, New Kind of Tired, and Aiden Farnsworth, as well as, of course, anyone else who's ever made the jump to Patreon to help directly support the channel. You guys are wonderful beyond words. Thank you. Merry Christmas, everyone. I'll see you next year.